My son locked me inside that cabin and walked away. Didn't run, just walked, like he was leaving the campsite, not a man to die. I keep coming back to that detail, the walking, not running, as if what he'd done wasn't worth the urgency of running. I'm 64 years old, retired electrician, spent 38 years pulling wire through walls, crawling under houses in the Georgia heat, and not once, not one single day did I think the most dangerous thing I'd ever face would be my own son. His name is Aaron. He's 36, and I loved him the way fathers love sons before they understand who those sons have become. Let me back up. My wife Carol passed away 2.5 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. 14 weeks from diagnosis to the end. There's no way to prepare for something like that. We've been married 31 years. She kept our house smelling like coffee and gardenia candles. She remembered everyone's birthday without writing it down. She balanced our checkbook to the penny and never once made me feel stupid for not knowing how. When she died, I didn't know how to be inside our house anymore. Every room had her in it. The dent in her pillow. The reading glasses she left on the kitchen counter because she always forgot them there. Aaron came around those first few months. He'd sit with me on the back porch and we'd drink beer and not say much. That was fine. That was enough. I thought we were grieving together. I didn't know then that he was calculating. The cabin was Carol's idea. Originally, we'd bought it 7 years earlier, up in the Blue Ridge Mountains, about 40 minutes outside of Ellijay, Georgia. Nothing fancy. 2 bedrooms, a stone fireplace, a wraparound porch that looked out at the ridge. We went up every October for the foliage. Sometimes we'd go in February just to sit by the fire and read. It was a place where neither of us had to be anything other than ourselves. After she was gone, I couldn't bring myself to go back up there. Couldn't sell it either. It just sat. Aaron started bringing it up around the 1-year mark of Carol's passing. Casual at first. "Dad, you should really get back up to the cabin. It might help you clear your head." I'd shrug it off. Then he started framing it differently. "The property taxes on that place, Dad, you're paying for something you're not using. You might want to think about what makes sense financially." I should have heard something in that. I didn't. I need to tell you something about Aaron that I didn't understand until it was almost too late. My nephew stood in my living room and told me that my living room is weak. I'm Robert. I stood in my living room and Toches loved him. He could talk himself out of anything and into anything, and I spent his whole childhood thinking that was a gift. Carol used to say, "That boy could sell water to a fish." She said it with pride. What we didn't see, what we couldn't see, or maybe didn't want to, was that Aaron had learned to perform warmth without feeling it. He knew exactly what people needed to hear, and he gave it to them, and underneath that, he did what was convenient for Aaron. He'd been through 2 jobs in 3 years by the time Carol died. He had credit card debt he'd never mentioned. He'd borrowed money from Carol's sister, my sister-in-law Patsy, without ever paying her back, and Patsy never told me because she didn't want to cause trouble. I found all this out later. What I knew at the time was that my son seemed attentive and kind, and when he suggested, in January of last year, that the 2 of us go up to the cabin for a long weekend, "Just to get you back up there, Dad. It'll be good for both of us," I said yes. I said yes because I missed Carol. I said yes because I thought Aaron and I needed that time together. I said yes because he was my son, and I still, even then, believed in who I'd raised him to be. We drove up on a Friday afternoon. Aaron was in good spirits, talking about his new apartment, a woman he'd been seeing, how he was thinking about going back to school for project management. He sounded like he had plans. He sounded like a man figuring his life out. I relaxed. That was my mistake. I relaxed. That was my mistake. The cabin was exactly as I'd left it. Carol's old quilt was still folded over the back of the couch. I'd forgotten that. I stood there in the doorway for a moment, and Aaron said, "You all right, Dad?" And I said, "Yeah, I was fine," and I went and put my bag in the back bedroom. That night we made chili, the same recipe we'd always made up there. We played cards. We watched an old John Wayne movie on the laptop because the cabin doesn't have cable. Around 10 o'clock, Aaron said he was tired and turned in, and I sat by the fire another hour thinking about Carol and thinking about how time moves and thinking that maybe I was going to be okay eventually. Saturday was good. We hiked the lower trail along the creek. Aaron was patient with my pace. I've had some knee trouble since a fall on a job site 3 years back. We ate sandwiches on a flat rock overlooking the water. He told me about a fishing trip he'd been on with some guys from his gym. I told him about a neighbor of mine back home who was rebuilding a '67 Mustang in his garage and how I'd been helping him on weekends. Normal conversation, father and son. That evening, Aaron made steaks on the cast iron and we sat on the porch after dinner with bourbon, watching the tree line go dark against the sky. And he said, very quietly, not making a big deal of it, "Dad, have you thought any more about getting a will set up?" I told him Carol and I had a will done years ago. Everything went to Aaron and a portion to her sister Patsy and a small amount to our church. He nodded, sipped his bourbon. Then he said, "What about the life insurance? Do you know if the policy is still current?" I looked at him. "Why are you asking about the life insurance, Aaron?" "Just making sure everything's in order," he said. "You're 64. These are practical things." I let it go. I shouldn't have, but I did. I told him everything was in order. The policy was through my union retirement. $250,000, beneficiary listed as Aaron, same as it had been since he was 19 years old. He said, "Good. That's good, Dad," and poured us both another 2 fingers of bourbon. I didn't sleep well that night. Sunday morning I woke up at 6:30. Aaron's bedroom door was still closed. I started a pot of coffee and stepped out onto the porch in my flannel and boots to watch the fog sit in the valley below. That's when I noticed his car was gone. I thought maybe he'd driven to the little country store down the mountain for something. They open at 7, sell decent breakfast biscuits. I wasn't worried yet. I went back inside, poured my coffee, went to add wood to the fireplace because the morning was cold, low 40s, and the fire from the night before had burned down to coals. I'm still not entirely sure of the order of what happened next. I've gone over it in my mind so many times that the sequence blurs. What I know is this. I added 2 logs to the fireplace and something didn't smell right. I'd burned wood in that fireplace for 7 years and I knew how it was supposed to smell, and this wasn't it. There was something underneath the wood smoke. Lighter fluid or something like it. I stood up and looked around the room, and that's when I saw the back of the couch, the side facing the wall, away from where I'd been sitting. Aaron had stuffed newspapers and a dish towel into the gap between the couch and the wall, and there was a thin line of the same accelerant on the baseboard below it. Then I heard the click. The front door. He'd locked the deadbolt from outside with his key, the sliding bolt on the back door. I heard that too a few seconds later. He must have slipped out the back while I was looking at the fireplace. I want to tell you I kept my head. I want to say I stayed calm and thought clearly. I didn't. I panicked. I pulled at the front door, yelled his name, pulled again. Then I caught myself. 38 years as an electrician, you learn that panic is the thing that gets you killed. Panic is what makes you touch the wrong wire. I made myself stop. I made myself drive. The fire was catching behind me. I could feel the temperature change. The windows in the main room were painted shut, hadn't been opened in years. I didn't have time for them. I went to the back bedroom, Carol's and mine. That window had a broken latch she'd been after me to fix for 2 years. I'd never gotten around to it. Best thing I ever procrastinated on. I got the window open, tore the screen out with my elbow, and dropped 6 feet into the frozen leaf litter below. I hit wrong on my bad knee and went down hard. Sat in the dirt for a few seconds making sure nothing was broken. My coffee mug was still in my hand. I don't know why I'd carried it with me. I set it down on the ground next to me, which I now understand was a somewhat absurd thing to do under the circumstances. The back of the cabin was already starting to go. The wood up there is dry in January. I limped away from it as fast as I could. I had no phone. Aaron had suggested the night before that I leave it inside. Just for tonight, Dad be present, we used to do that up here, and I had. I'd left it on the kitchen counter like an idiot, like a man who trusted his son. The nearest property was the Whitfield place, about a mile and a half down the fire road. Earl and Martha Whitfield, a retired couple from Chattanooga who came up most weekends. I'd met them twice over the years. Once when Carol and I helped them when their truck got stuck in the mud, and once when Earl knocked on our door to warn us a bear had been getting into the trash cans on the road. Earl Whitfield is 71 years old, hard of hearing, and drives a 1998 Ford F-150 that sounds like a lawnmower. He is also the kindest man I have ever met in my life, and he opened his door to a limping stranger with ash on his jacket and a wild look in his eyes and said, "Son, you better come inside." I sat at their kitchen table while Martha made me a cup of coffee I didn't need, and Earl called 911. He didn't ask me a lot of questions. He just said, "I'm going to let the people who need to know. You just sit still." I sat still. Through the window, I could see the glow up the ridge where Carol's and my cabin were burning. The deputies from Gilmer County got there fast, considering the road. 2 fire trucks from the volunteer department. They put out most of it, but the main room was gone. The back bedroom, Carol's and my room where I'd gone out the window, survived mostly intact. The quilt was okay. I don't know why that mattered to me as much as it did, but it did. A deputy named Torres took my statement at the Whitfield's kitchen table. I told him everything. About Aaron's questions the night before, the insurance policy, the accelerant on the baseboard, the locked doors, the car missing before any of it started. Torres wrote it all down carefully and said, "Sir, do you know where your son might be heading?" I thought about it. Aaron's apartment was in Marietta, about 2 hours south. But he wouldn't go home first, not if he thought he'd killed me. He'd want to wait to establish some kind of alibi, maybe reach out to make it look like a normal Sunday. "He'll call me," I said. "Within the next few hours, he'll call my phone to check on me. That's how I know he'll think I'm dead, because if he thought I got out, the last thing he'd do was call." Torres looked at me for a moment. "You've thought about this pretty clearly." "I've had about 2 hours to think about it," I said. "Here's what I didn't expect. How practical grief is when it's mixed with survival." Sitting at Earl Whitfield's kitchen table wrapped in a wool blanket Martha had brought me, I wasn't thinking about how betrayed I felt. I wasn't thinking about all the good memories of Aaron as a small boy, the time he caught his first base, the way he used to fall asleep in the car with his mouth open, how proud I was when he graduated high school. All of that was still there, somewhere underneath. But right then, what I felt was a very clear, very cold kind of clarity. This was premeditated. This wasn't a moment of rage, an argument that went too far. Aaron had driven up there with me knowing what he intended to do. He'd asked about the insurance the night before to confirm the amount. He'd suggested I leave my phone inside. He prepared the accelerant before we went to bed. My son had planned to kill me. I want to be honest about what that moment was like, because I've seen these stories told in a way that makes the realization feel dramatic, like a scene in a movie. It didn't feel like that. It felt like the ground underneath something I'd stood on my whole life just quietly removed itself. Not a collapse, just a removal. Like someone pulled the floor out so slowly and carefully that you didn't notice until you were already falling. The call came at 11:47 that morning. Torres had coordinated with investigators from the sheriff's department. They were already tracing Aaron's phone and had a deputy sitting outside his apartment building in Marietta. My phone was gone in the fire, but Torres had arranged for a call to be routed through Earl's landline. He set it up like I was calling from my own phone. Aaron answered on the second ring. "Dad, hey, I'm sorry I left early. I had that thing I told you about." He hadn't told me about anything, but I let him talk. Got down the mountain and realized I'd left my phone charger back in Marietta, so I just figured I'd head back. "How's the cabin?" "Everything good," I said. The cabin burned down this morning, Aaron. Silence. Long silence. And then, what? The cabin burned down this morning, Aaron. Silence. And then, what? The cabin burned down. The main room is gone. I got out the back bedroom window. More silence. And then his voice changed. Not to guilt, not to relief, not to anything I would have predicted. It shifted into something practiced. Oh my God, Dad, are you okay? What happened? Did you call the fire department? Where are you right now? Question after question after question. The way a person asks questions when they're terrified, you might stop talking and start asking your own. I'm at the Whitfields, I said. I'm fine. The deputies are here. Another pause. Shorter this time. Deputies? They're investigating the cause, I said. They found some things. I heard him breathe, just once. And I knew in that single breath that he understood. I said, Aaron? He didn't answer. I said, Aaron. He didn't answer. I said, I found the newspapers behind the couch. I found what you put on the baseboard. I know what you did. Nothing. I said, I think you should stay where you are. I think you should not get in your car. He hung up. The deputy outside his apartment in Marietta had already seen him come to the window when the phone rang. They knocked on his door 40 minutes later. He didn't run. He opened the door and sat down on the edge of his bed and stared at the floor and didn't say anything for a long time. That's what they told me anyway, that he just sat there. I want to tell you about a Sunday morning when Aaron was 9 years old. We were up at the cabin. Same cabin, first or second year we'd had it. Carol was still asleep. Aaron and I woke up early, and I made us oatmeal on the stove, and we took our bowls out to the porch and sat there in the cold watching a fog bank move through the valley below like something alive. He was at the age where he still thought sitting with his father was a good use of a morning, before friends became the whole world, before whatever happened inside him that I never fully understood. He said, Dad, is this what heaven looks like? I told him I didn't know. I said it might look something like this, yes. He nodded very seriously, the way 9-year-olds nod when they're pretending to consider something profound, and then he went back to his oatmeal. I've thought about that morning a lot since January. I've thought about who that boy was, and when the line got crossed between that boy and the man who came up to that same cabin 36 years later with accelerant in his jacket. I don't have an answer. I don't think there is one. Not a clean one. Aaron was charged with attempted murder, first-degree arson, and elder abuse under Georgia statute. That last charge carrying an enhanced sentence because I'm over 65. His public defender tried to get the arson charge reduced by arguing the fire spread was limited, which is a hell of a thing to argue when the main room of a structure is gutted. It didn't work. He pled guilty in October. 12 years, with the possibility of parole after 8. I wasn't in the courtroom when he entered the plea. My attorney advised me I could make a victim impact statement, and I sat with that for a long time. Wrote several versions of it, and in the end decided not to deliver it. I had nothing left to say to Aaron that wouldn't have been for me rather than for him, and I didn't want to do anything for me in that room. Here is what I want to tell you, if you stayed with me this long. My neighbor Ted, the one rebuilding the Mustang, he's been through some things of his own. His daughter stopped speaking to him for 3 years over something that sounds small from the outside and wasn't. He told me once, while we were under the hood of that car, the worst thing about being betrayed by someone you love is you lose 2 people. You lose them and you lose who you were when you trusted them. I think about that a lot, because it's true that I lost Aaron, or rather, lost the version of Aaron I believed in. But I also had to make peace with the fact that I was a man who hadn't seen it, who'd sat on that porch with bourbon and answered questions about a life insurance policy without feeling what he should have felt. Who'd left his phone inside because his son asked him to. That's hard to sit with. It really is. But here's the other side of that. Earl and Martha Whitfield had me over for dinner 3 times that winter. Earl would pick me up in that loud truck, and Martha would make pot roast, and we'd sit at their kitchen table for hours. They didn't treat me like a victim. They treated me like a neighbor. That distinction, small as it sounds, meant everything. My sister-in-law, Patsy, drove down from Knoxville the week after it happened and stayed for 10 days. She told me about the money Aaron had borrowed from her. We cried about Carol. We laughed about Carol too, which is the better kind of crying anyway. The cabin is being rebuilt. I decided not to sell. A contractor in LJ gave me an estimate in March and we broke ground in May. The layout is almost identical to what it was, except the windows open properly now, all of them, because I made sure of that. And there's a new deadbolt on the front door, a model that can't be locked from outside with a key. Small detail. Matters to me. Last October I drove up alone for the first time. The main room still smelled like new lumber. I brought Carol's quilt, the one from the back bedroom, the one that made it, and put it back over the couch. I made coffee. I sat on the porch and watched the fog in the valley. The same fog Aaron and I had watched when he was 9 years old. The fog he'd asked me if it was heaven. I think it might be, I'd told him. Sitting there alone, 64 years old, with a bad knee in a rebuilt cabin and a son serving 12 years in a Georgia State Correctional Facility. I looked out at that fog and I thought, yeah, something like this. Maybe not heaven, but still mine. Still here, and so was I. I've had a lot of time to think about cause and effect since January. Not in any mystical sense. I'm not a man who reaches for that kind of explanation. But I do believe, in a very practical and human way, that what we build over a lifetime eventually shows itself. The choices we make, the corners we cut, the people we fail to hold accountable, all of it accumulates quietly until one day it surfaces in a form you can't ignore. Aaron didn't become the man who locked his father in a burning cabin overnight. That man was assembled slowly, one unexamined decision at a time, over years. And I wasn't paying close enough attention to see it happening. That's the part that stays with me. Not the fire, not the cold morning, or the drop from the window, or the limp down that fire road in the dark. What stays with me is the realization that wisdom isn't something you arrive at. It's something you have to keep practicing every day, or it goes soft on you. I thought I knew my son. I thought 36 years of loving someone meant I understood them. What I actually had was a story I told myself so many times it had stopped resembling the truth. There's a version of strength that looks like stubbornness and feels like loyalty. I had that version for too long. Real strength, the kind that actually serves you, requires the courage to see clearly even when your seeing is something you love. Aaron gave me signs. The borrowed money he never repaid. The jobs that didn't last. The way his questions about the insurance policy felt slightly off, slightly too careful, and I filed that feeling away instead of sitting with it. A man with genuine courage of character would have sat with it. I didn't. I'm not punishing myself for that. That's not the point. The point is that intelligence without honesty is just cleverness, and cleverness will eventually work against you. I was clever enough to get out of that cabin. I wasn't honest enough with myself in the years before to ask the harder questions about who my son was becoming and what I was going to do about it. What I know now, what that January morning hammered into me in a way nothing else ever has, is that resilience isn't dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It's the thing that makes you stop panicking and start thinking when the fire is already behind you. It's 38 years of understanding that the wrong move under pressure is worse than no move at all. It's Earl Whitfield opening his door without hesitation, and Martha putting a coffee cup in front of a man she barely knew. It's Patsy driving 4 hours because family, the real kind, doesn't calculate before it shows up. Aaron made his choices. They will follow him for a very long time. I made mine, some good, some not, and I'm still here to reckon with them. That cabin is rebuilt now. The windows all open properly. And I think that's about as fine a metaphor as real life ever hands you.